Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar today on achieving total agility, bridging the strategy to execution gap with clarity and rally. My name is Mike Lentini. I'm one of our product marketing managers here focusing on clarity and rally. And today I'm fortunately enough joined by Matt Gorbsky and James Gaines. And before we dive into our webinar content, I just want to go through a couple quick logistic items. If you're having issues with your video playback quality, just make sure you adjust your personal settings in the lower right-hand corner, leveraging the gear icon. And then below our presentation window, you will see a questions and answers box. So feel free to throw any questions you have during the webinar into that questions box, and we will do our best to address them at the end. And anyone we don't have time for, we will make sure we follow up with you on. At the end of our presentation, we are going to launch a poll for some feedback on today's presentation, as well as a feedback option at the end of the presentation. So we really appreciate any feedback or anything that you wanted to see moving forward. So with that, Matt, I will end my rant and throw it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Hi, everybody. Matt Gorbsky, I'm the head of product for Rally, and I am so excited to be joined today by James Gaines. James is an executive leadership coach and business architect at one of our amazing partners, Icon Agility Services. This is a webinar that we're actually kind of following up from the previous one we did, talking about the execution challenge, and we'll get into that. But James is an expert in total agility, in connecting strategy and execution, in strategic business architecture, and there's a lot of great content that we're going to go through today, and I'm really excited to jump right into this. So James, I'm going to hand that over to you, and you can kick things off for us.
Great. So hello, everyone, as Matt said, and thank you, Matt, for that great introduction. I'm James Gaines with Icon Agility, and today we're going to talk a little bit about strategy and the strategy to execution gap, and show how clarity and rally can be very, very helpful in closing that gap for all of us. There will be 5 different sections that we go through. First, about the challenge, what kind of like why now, then understanding what the experts are telling us about the problem and understanding those perspectives, then getting into what the tools role they play, how different execution teams engage with that in terms of how they're seeing the same problems. And then finally, we talk about the great solutions and how they work from our friends here at Broadcom. So after that, we'll have some questions, and I look forward to the questions, because really the questions are the big part of the discussion. So without delaying any further, in today's climate of rapid change from the top of the house, a lot of perspective around strategy to execution is built up, and quite frankly, the viewpoint at this level is that the challenges are that 70% of different initiatives are failing. That's coming out of the people at PwC and the Standish Group. We also have Business Architecture Guild helping us understand that 80 to 100% objectives are being met by only 2% of CFOs. We've got of those groups, only 5% of those employees are understanding the actual strategy. The confidence that we're lacking at the CEO is that only 9 out of 10 of their objectives are actually being able to be met. And then in addition, we have some perspective that some deep research that shows that 80% are unsuccessfully executed. And of that 80%, 70% of them are failing from bad execution. So this is a pretty strong view from the top about what that strategy to execution gap actually is and what we could potentially need to do about it. So given that problem, the experts are telling us today that there's the gap is not necessarily dealing with the strategy to execution per se, but the reality is that there's something that's actually missing. All right. One of the things that potentially is missing is strategic business architecture. It fills that space between the corporate strategy and how things flow down to the operation model. A lot of us are very, very familiar with how those levels, the operation model and execution occurs. But once we get above the operating model, the idea of that how strategy is making its way through is really being stifled because of the lack of strategic business architecture. So what is strategic business architecture? It's a holistic view of an organization and its ecosystem. And we're going to really come back to that word ecosystem because that's really the power and the punch here. But it creates a common understanding of strategy, the execution, and how all of that is aligned. And this is important not only because of the earlier statistics that we showed, but the need to bridge between the high-level business strategy and technical execution is not always happening in the sense of the viewpoint of the leaders. And we'll talk a little bit about what's going on with that. But the net is that the idea of strategic business architecture, it solves the problem of not knowing how to execute architecture. What experts are also saying about the strategic business architecture is that it needs to have kind of a first-class seat at the table. We need to elevate business architecture to a central role in strategic execution. Now, that means that the execution of strategy and not necessarily the execution of delivery. There is obviously an overlap there, but the point here is that business architecture needs to be front and center for those conversations, especially as they relate to strategic portfolio management, which a lot of us do see, and how that's being driven down. So the elevation of business capabilities to the center of business architecture ecosystem is important because a lot of execution may or may not align with strategy, but very, very little of it aligns to the business capabilities. And that's a bit of the missing link here and kind of sort of why we're having this discussion today. Now, more of the discussion goes something like, now, we just talked about how the business capabilities are needed and necessary. And we're used to views that there to the upper left where we have strategic priorities and business strategy that simply ties to different initiatives. That traceability is there, but the traceability that needs to happen is we need to introduce that green set of capabilities in between the strategy and the execution so that we can understand what's actually happening on the execution side. The execution doesn't really tie back up very well without the benefit of the capabilities because of the fact that the traceability is talking about things at one level, the strategy talk about different things at the execution level, and a lot of time those things are not always lining up. And so go ahead.
So, James, I think one of the really interesting things when we talked about this in the last webinar is where some of these screenshots are coming from. And in the top left, the smaller screenshot is really kind of showing the fact that there's actions that are happening, and you've got duplicative actions, right? You've got multiple initiatives and work that's happening across the organization that is redundant. So I think this visual and your talk track here, I think, is really powerful in terms of like being able to connect the work that you're doing and making sure that it actually aligns to the strategy and organizing it in those capabilities so that you're more efficient. You're not, you don't have these redundant activities going on. If you're thinking about things from this product capability perspective, you're going to do it once, right? And have that impact.
That's right. That's right. And that's a great point to emphasize. So thank you for that, because a capability is very specific to the organization. It's not like we go out and invent or create new capabilities or that they're specific to a particular part of an organization. You tell me what business you're in, and I could pretty much tell you your business capabilities levels 1, 2, and 3. So the idea that we're not tying back to them is the problem, because it really represents a big part of who that organization is and what that organization's purpose happens to be. So earlier, I promised that we kind of come back to the idea of the ecosystem. And here, what you see are the different components within a particular business architecture. These components identify all the things that need to be in place. Now, many of us are familiar with value streams. However, when we talk at the business architecture level, there are value streams, there are value stages, and value propositions. And all of those are independent citizens at the table within the ecosystem, and they all have different roles. So now our viewpoint from the top, when we think about value streams, needs to be expanded to be considered the value stages within the value streams and the overall value propositions that they fulfill. Also, business capabilities enable us to think about products and services and in terms of how they tie back to the organization's core purpose. The products and services are less about great ideas that are coming up in various silos and small parts of organizations, but the idea that those things are coming up, but they're not always connected back, and someone else may be coming up with products and ideas in a different part of the organization, and they should all connect back to the same capabilities so that we know that these are the right things to be building within the organization. So it's not just strategy, but it's also capability. And this overall approach is what we call capability-based planning, and it drives all the improvement within the organization. The big takeaway here is that we previously focused on value streams, and we want to improve elements and steps in the value stream. We want to shift from that, because now value streams are much larger, to improving actual business capabilities. And that's where we want to be able to drive our efforting and our investment. So now that we've talked a little bit about the expert point of view, let's talk a little bit about the execution teams and the execution team point of view. One of the challenges with this in the past has been when I presented some of this data with the execution teams are very much feeling, no, that's, we don't have a challenge with execution. We're doing great. I mean, we've had agile delivery, and we've had great new ways of working around that. We've got DevOps, and we've been able to accelerate delivery 10, 20 fold. We also have AI, which is showing great promise to do even more. And then you've got people looking at the ask that the execution teams, we've successfully delivered our ask, and we've been able to make the times and the commitments. The issue there is that if we can just imagine for a moment we're an execution team, we tend to live in a world where there's an expectation that we're going to be presented with asks and we deliver, and we kind of focus on that delivery. Unfortunately, we don't have always the ability to be able to tie back that ask to something strategic, and are we able to tie back that ask also to something within the business capability? That visibility, that ecosystem just does not exist for most of us. And we end up being in a situation of order taking. And then depending upon the organization that we're in, it might not even be psychologically safe to ask some of these questions, right? So we have to really make sure that it's psychologically safe, but also we have the mechanism and the wherewithal to do that. And that's what business architecture delivers. Also with the OKRs, and a lot of people feel like that's aligning and driving their strategy. But the issues around OKRs is that they are very, very effective for us to really zone in and get things done and focus on it now. But again, we don't always know if that OKR is tied to something strategic. It's tied to something that's really hot, the hot potato of the moment, but it's not necessarily tied to something strategic. And then even if it is it tied back to your business capabilities? Okay. So fundamentally, we're also a little bit misaligned around the metrics that we track. At the execution level, we're tracking metrics around how quickly, how cheaply we met a particular ask. We're not tracked on how many strategic items we've delivered. We're not tracked on how many business capability items we've delivered. Whereas with these executives, if you look back to those statistics, that's all they're looking at is how much strategy is being delivered and how much business capability is being enabled and improved. So those things are big reasons why we have a bit of a misalignment between execution teams and the top of the house. So execution is the problem, but the problem is not execution. All right. So if you think of steps here, 1 through 6, as being just a generic delivery or execution model where we're doing some ideation, discovery, and going into design, developing, testing, launching, supporting, improving. All right. That's very well known to us. Okay. Um, so with those steps, those 6 steps, we have to ask ourselves, so if we're doing those things well, how is it that we're missing the meeting the needs of the top of the house? How is it that those statistics can be true, and yet we're all doing a great job on delivering 1 through 6? So again, in the previous slide, I talked a little bit about the execution team's bias, but that bias exists simply because of we lack of connectivity of what we do back to strategy and business capabilities. So we believe we're missing a step. And we believe that step that's missing is what we call step 0. So step 0 is the step of activities that ensures that any ask that's coming through to us as execution teams is actually being tied back to those strategic needs of the organization and the business architecture, that it's clear where those tie-ins are actually being made. So laying it out differently, just simply kind of in a sequence, we can think of step 0 as being made up of this capability-based planning series. And so steps A through F are all within step 0. And these are the steps that we believe need to happen. These are the steps that will effectively conjoin and align execution teams with strategy and business capabilities, because within step 0 is where the organizational level challenges are dealt with. We actually figure out and resolve what the business objectives are for those business challenges. We identify the capabilities that are actually touched on and which ones need to be improved in order to address those objectives. And then we can get into the actions and understanding where the investment needs to be made and what initiatives, and then defining a roadmap, which then feeds in to our execution teams. And if we actually were to have that, then we really could, at the execution team level, pull on or tug on any feature or any ask, and we should have a way of seeing how that touches all the way back up the strategy and all the way back up to the actual business capability.
And James, I'm just going to add in here. Like, I love this view because I think it does a great job of kind of elaborating the concepts we're talking about. Yeah. And a lot of you listening to this are probably looking at this and recognizing, like, well, we do roadmaps. We talk about OKRs. We have objectives. We take actions. We create our initiatives. We have strategies. But I think the thing that we're trying to kind of push on here is the connectivity between these, right? There's relationships between each of these activities and between each step. So the objects, the artifacts themselves actually relate to each other, and that's how you get to that full traceability that you're talking about. And that's part of essentially why we're talking about this from the Rally and Clarity perspective. And at the value ops level, this is not just a Rally function. This is not just a Clarity function. This is something that, when those two come together, you can talk about the different capabilities, the product capabilities that we have to support each of these. So some of you might be doing this already in the tools that you're using. What I'm hoping we can start to kind of, as we go through the rest of this content, you can start to see how to apply these maybe a little bit differently in ways to achieve those outcomes, or give you new ideas to go and act on. So,
yeah, and thank you for that, Matt, because when you look at this probably does look familiar, but if you really dig into the question within step C, and the question within step D, those are definitely questions that are not being asked and are not being met. What capabilities do we need to invest in to reach our objectives? First of all, that happens very much left of delivery in and of itself. So at what level is the organization operating? And you probably have many other challenges behind why that's not happening. You may have a very siloed organization. Your organizational culture may not support and inspire such collaborative commonality of strategy and and execution at the level that before we get to the point that we're actually trying to hand things over to delivery teams. So the idea here is that you could have redundancy, you could have many other non-technical reasons for why those questions aren't being asked, but question also what specific changes, steps, or actions improve those capabilities. That gets you to the capability improvement point in step D. So those two, C and D, would be the net new news here for how it is that we're doing things differently and what is it that makes and closes that strategy to execution gap. So in whole, what we have here is the way that Broadcom's Value Ops provides us the tools and overall execution and strategy delivery that's necessary for us to achieve and close that gap and actually have business capabilities woven in. So those same steps, A through F, are just laid out here. And what we're trying to help and understand and create this view that within the clarity, we can do all of these things, address the challenges, the objectives, capabilities, the actions, the initiatives, and the roadmaps, and then use that information to inform what's happening in Rally and how we're doing the ideation. And notice how that ideation follows that roadmap, because the ideation is constrained to what is on that roadmap. It's not greenfield. And so that's the idea of why we think the strategy execution gap happens, because a lot of times that ideation and discovery is dressed as step one. And a lot of times it's just simply not building in the discipline and rigor and the know-how that it needs to tie back to business capabilities. So this is the view that we really want to expand ourselves at. A lot of us have done 1 through 6 many, many, many times, and maybe even done A, D, E, and F, but we haven't done A, B, C, D, and F. So that's the big jump here, the big difference. So now I'm going to kick it back over to Matt, but the idea here is that we've taken each one of those steps in the following slides and just tie them into what those screens look like and how those different ecosystem elements are present within Clarity and Rally. So Matt, you want to chat us through this?
Yeah, so again, if you're a Clarity customer, you're already familiar with the flexibility that Clarity affords us. If you're not, this is, I think, a good intro into some of the ways in which Clarity as a higher level strategy tool augments Rally's functionality from the execution side. And one of the really interesting things is you can do things like create the concept of this business capability, right? You can have this strategy, the strategic theme, that the business capability, that the high level thing that we're talking about anchoring off of, and actually define that, right? You can apply a SWOT analysis and actually understand what are your opportunities that you want to go after, right? Where that feeds into kind of the objectives that we're going to talk about. We can model these strategies and these kind of those high level strategic themes, those business strategies, and also then show what objectives from a business level we're looking to accomplish with those. So that's the hierarchies capability within Clarity, allows you to decompose these into the structure that James has laid out, right? That A through F flow, right? So the different capabilities in Clarity allow you to identify those and have a single source of truth for this too, right? Like, a lot of this exists in PowerPoint decks. A lot of this exists inside of spreadsheets in organizations. Being able to centralize this in the tool that everybody has, common access to, and maintain that alignment means that you can actually then look at a feature in Rally and have the traceability all the way back up through to what the strategy actually is. So starting at the top, I think this is just a really powerful way to be able to actually map those business challenges into your business strategy and define and capture those here.
Absolutely. And as we go through this, all of what Matt's talking about can be succinctly compressed into that one question. What are the problems to solve, obstacles to overcome, and outcomes to seize? So what the people at Broadcom have done is they've been able to create a tool that is actually integrated on both sides of strategy and execution so that that question can be answered. A lot of times the tool can't answer that question because it doesn't do full end-to-end strategy to execution. But because the value op solution of Clarity and Rally does, these questions that we actually have lined up to each one of these sections of the tool can be answered. I don't know if you want to drain these, Matt, but I think this slide is really, really powerful. If you could just help people understand what's happening here, I think this will help.
Yeah. Did we skip one? I think.
Yes, we did. I'm sorry. Let me go back.
Sorry. I figured we should start with.
Yeah, I didn't mean to hit the button.
Yeah, we talk about like business objectives, that next level down, right? You're taking these high level business strategies, breaking these down and answering questions around what's the most important thing we need to actually do? What are the needles we're trying to move? How are we going to know that we were successful? And the concept of objectives in Clarity can also help capture those, and you can associate those back up. So that's that hierarchy that we were just showing in that last screen. This is where being able to connect and map these to those strategic themes is critical. You want to know that the work you're actually doing, the outcomes you're trying to achieve, are actually in support of your overall business strategy. And this is a very, I think, simple and elegant way to actually kind of decompose these and deconstruct those strategies into what are you really trying to do. And the important part to call out here is the outcomes themselves, like the thing that we're identifying in our objective object, is separate from the work. And we have the same kind of concept in Rally around the same objective that connects into the Clarity objectives. It's independent. It's related to the work that you're doing, but it is not just because you did the work and you're completed the progress of everything doesn't mean you achieve those outcomes. So I see a couple of questions coming in about objectives, and I think this is kind of one of those places where terminology matters, right? Awesome. This is not a safe objective in terms of PI objectives or anything like that. These are outcomes. What are you trying to do as an organization, as a business? James, is there anything you want to add there?
Yeah, these objectives are not part of delivery. They're not part of execution. They're very far left of safe, right? These objectives are the objectives that the organization holds, and it's critical to its success. These are the objectives that are addressing challenges like avoidance of disruption or trying to figure out how to innovate in a new product space. They're very much aligned with the products and services that are being offered and the categories of those, as opposed to being part of delivering enhancements or improvements to products and services at some technical or digital implementation. All right. So I really want us to kind of develop a mindset that helps us understand that there is execution, and the execution is super important, but this is the work that happens before execution. This is the work that happens when we're really talking about investing whatever discretionary dollars or the organization has to contribute to its betterment of its customers and its own survival.
Yeah, and there's another question here about you use the term outcomes to seize. And does that relate to only the problems or maybe also the opportunities from something like the SWOT analysis?
Yeah, so the outcomes to seize are when the executives do that, 2-3 day offsite, and everyone's talking about what the needs are and what the things that they would like to see as outcomes. What we're talking about are outcomes at that level. We're talking about outcomes at the level of the strategic intent, not the outcomes that are part of a result of an action, but it's more of a result of a strategy. And as we all know, strategy includes many, many actions. So the idea is that we want to get to the objectives of the organization and not the objectives of the individual implementation effort.
So maybe, do you have an example of what one organization might have as one of those outcomes they're measuring here? Because I think there's just a little bit of confusion in some of the questions around OKRs, KPIs, like the terminology again. Just what would be something at this level that we're talking about so far to the left that is kind of anchoring that strategy to the outcome?
So the reason that we're talking about capabilities is because capabilities provide us a nice map for what those objectives could or should be. So in the capability map, we might have something as a level one business capability is managing the customer. So now managing the customer means that, well, we have to be able to actually engage in billing with that customer. We have to engage in product delivery with that customer. We have to engage in understanding what that customer's sentiment is, what that customer wants. Whatever the needs are around those types of things are closer to these type of business objectives. We want to achieve 15% more new customers, or we want to achieve customers within a particular geographic region that we currently aren't serving. That would fall under manage the customer, and that would be one of these types of objectives. But it's not limited to just a department or a silo. It's really something that should be traversing and covering the full organization across all its customer engagement. So whatever the customer experience model is for that organization, these objectives would be feeding or fed by that.
That's probably a good segue into that step C, right? Into the actual business capabilities. So actually being able to define what those capabilities are. And as you mentioned before, a lot of you work in industries where these capabilities, you really don't have to go and spend a lot of time trying to figure out what they are. There's a pretty standard set that are out there. And James, I'm sure you can speak to where to find some of these if anyone's interested.
Yep.
But being able to identify what those capabilities for your business, for your organization actually are. So again, we've got the high level, the strategies. What are you trying to actually do? How are you going to actually measure success, and what are you really trying to get at? And then how do you invest in the right capabilities to achieve those outcomes is what we're trying to model here. So again, those relationships, right? That hierarchy that you see in the top right, a screenshot from Clarity, allows you to establish that flow and that breakdown. And then being able to map the business capabilities back up to those outcomes in different ways and visualize that, right? You can do all of this in Clarity with the functionality that exists today, right? You can create this concept, this investment object called business capability, and it has the attributes that you're going to put in here. So if you want to look at which capabilities you as an organization need, you can create those, and then you can identify where you're investing and look at the different breakdown in terms of which capabilities are needed to be enhanced to actually support those outcomes. But you're aligning the strategy and execution along the way.
Excellently said. And let's keep in mind, this is part 2 of an earlier webinar. And in that earlier webinar, the case was made for business capabilities, and Clarity was not the tool, but clarification around the idea of what a business capability is and why you need it. But I want to bring back that point, for anyone who may have either missed that video or just maybe wondering. The purpose, the point and purpose, the new news behind capabilities is that it's the ultimate guardrail so that what you execute does not become something that is not aligned with your organization's core purpose for being. Okay, Matt just talked about a little bit about these different capability models. These capability models are made available through Total Agility, but it's based on the idea that if I know your ticker or your organization's, SIC code or NAICS code, whatever it is that classifies your organization into the business that it's in, then therefore I know your business capabilities. It's not something that you invent. It takes a lot of work internally to build up that model. And we'll talk about some ways that we have to greatly, greatly accelerate that. But the idea is that it is the ultimate reference for what your business does. And by aligning strategy and execution to your capabilities, you will forever be on the correct side of, is this something that is truly in our lane, or is this something that's a great idea, but really for another business?
Yep. It probably takes us into that next, and hopefully the visuals, you're kind of seeing how we're constructing this hierarchy, hopefully starts to put things into perspective. I see some other questions around the relationships between business capabilities and OKRs and what happens here. So again, starting from that top, right? If we're talking about the actions we're going to take, we want to maintain that alignment all the way back up to the strategic theme. So what are we trying to do as an organization? What are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? That's those objectives, right? Those outcomes are, as Stephen mentioned in our Q&A chat, like an output metric would be you onboarded 400 new customers, but the outcome is going to be more of the NPS impact, right? You improved your NPS by 8 points or something along those lines, right? Those objectives that you're trying to hit as an organization are anchored to that strategy. The business capabilities are the areas that you're going to be investing in. Where do you operate? Is it more on the customer management side of things? Is it your internal billing? Is it procurement? Is it like, where in your overall business capability map do you need to make investments to move the needles against those objectives? And then you get into the actions, and this is where this is flexible, right? That your organization might be a little bit different. Right? That line at the bottom, the structure can vary based on your needs, and these can be complex. But this is where you, depending on how you're structured and what works for your business, you can have a structure that might look like this around understanding value streams and how those align to the business capabilities. You're delivering products within those value streams, and within each product, you've got kind of that next level breakdown into the work itself. What initiatives, what epics, what are you actually doing to make changes to your products that are delivered through your value streams, that are in support of your overall business capabilities, that are moving the needles for your organization, that deliver your work business strategy, right? So hopefully this kind of helps show how this connection, the strategy flows. And I think a lot of you on this call might be jumping into this conversation almost now at the bottom, right here. We've got the initiatives, the epics. This is the work we're going to do. But what we're trying to make sure that we get across is that work has to have an alignment up to that strategy level. And this is a really well defined way to actually maintain that alignment and deliver on the gaps between what your executive team's trying to do in terms of deliver against their objectives, their outcomes, and what the teams are actually building and connecting the dots there.
I love that, because this slide is really instrumental to the overall understanding. I mean, if there's any slide in the deck, that this might be the money slide, because the reason is that even though it says value streams there, for a lot of us who have come to this space coming from delivery. So when you're looking at the work you're delivering, and a lot of us engage in the quest of, well, what is the value stream that governs this work that I'm trying to do? And we're kind of looking up and we're working our way upward into the organization to find that value stream. And from that bottom up perspective, coming from the execution, there tends to be a value stream, or maybe a couple of value streams, or maybe a handful of value streams. But in reality, when you're coming at it from the point of view of the executives, are coming at it from strategy, there are hundreds of value streams that support and enable a given business capability. The fan out ratio, the cardinality between business capabilities and value streams is really, really high. All right. So this is an oversimplified view here, because that level of value streams has as I talked about earlier, each value stream, there may be tens or hundreds of them, and each value stream itself has value stages, and all of them equate to some type of value proposition. And that's before you get to the product, right? So that's the ecosystem that drives and handles all of this. So when we're talking about business capabilities, you could probably draw a faint line between business capabilities and value streams, that everything above that line, like business capabilities, objectives, strategic things, it's all business defined. Value streams, that ratchet, that kind of layer where we have value streams, value stages, and value propositions, they are kind of, they create the transition from going from what the business is and what its purpose is to what the business needs to actually be doing, working on, and prioritizing in order to achieve that purpose. So this is a really, really powerful slide for us to understand what's going on, and why we're talking about it is because of the way that cardinality just expands out when you're talking about the relationship between business capabilities and value streams. This is just a viewpoint into the ecosystem, but the ecosystem is rich and it's large and it's diverse.
Yeah. So that probably takes us into the next section around initiatives. Right?
Yep.
Excuse me. So the initiatives themselves are what we're using to connect that strategic business architecture to the portfolio management, right? A lot of you are in the world of strategic portfolio management. You're trying to decide what work to do. What I'm hoping we're kind of laying out is a great framework for prioritization of some of these things, right? How do you know what initiatives to actually work on? And we can look at the alignment to determine if these are the most important things for our business. How does that actually influence the work that we're actually delivering from the initiative level? So this might be your highest level portfolio item or mid-level portfolio item over in Rally that connects over to those objects in Clarity. And then again, you have that traceability and that line of sight all the way up. But this can be that kind of the group of all the actions that you're changing. Actions, when we talk about that here, is really the changes you're making, right? From an engineering perspective, it's what user stories, what changes of the code are you making? What configuration changes are you making? What training are you giving to your teams, right? That's not necessarily code changes. What actions are you taking to connect the work that you're doing back up to deliver against those outcomes?
Yeah, and it's before investment, so the money kicks in here at the initiative level, but above initiatives, there's really just intention and strategy.
The way you actually then communicate these and reflect that connection of what you're trying to do to the to those strategic themes and your overall goals, we can use roadmaps. So Clarity has this amazing roadmap functionality, and being able to do things like group these swim lanes by those strategic themes, by those investment or by the business capabilities, right? You can group this in lots of different ways based on those hierarchies and actually say, show me my roadmap per business capability. If I own that capability, or if I'm responsible for delivering against certain outcomes, what are we doing to actually deliver against this? And James, you and I were talking like our conversations leading up to this. I love this view because it's essentially allowing you to say you can make changes, right? This is the point at which you're going to start turning massive ships. Most of you work for organizations that do not change quickly for lots of reasons, but this is kind of one of those, all the reasons that James has laid out are generally the reasons it's hard to turn the ship and why it takes so long. There's all of those different layers involved in changing strategy. But if you can actually say there's a market condition that is now, the new reality, which many of us are dealing with today, how do we change that and have a new strategic goal, a new outcome that our leaders are trying to hit, have that actually reflected down here in the roadmap, and then see what are we doing to actually make this pivot and turn that ship quickly.
Yeah, and so I'm glad you brought up that point, Matt, because a lot of roadmaps tend to be like printed on paper, and they tend to be handed off to someone as if to say, this is it, this is what we're going to do, and
Go
this is
forth and
what's
execute now.
yeah, for the next year, for the next 6 months, for the next 3 months. And I would like for us to begin to think a little differently about that. I mean, the power of this being in the value ops tool for Rally is that we can just simply be governed by whatever the latest version is of this particular roadmap. As investment decisions change, as we begin to prioritize, I mean, I may need to do something differently based upon what the outcome is from different tariff decisions. So based upon those type of decisions, I'm not the one who makes the decision. I'm no longer able to have a business where I can make and sell things. People are going to wait 9 months for my new product. I have to shift my whole organization over to being sense and respond. So where I can just simply be reactive to what is happening in the marketplace. So when that tariff information comes down, and no matter how much it flip-flops, this roadmap should be tracking that and changing in accordance with it based upon whatever the objectives are for the organization. So the idea that you have a place where you can stick your hands and make these changes, like we're in Minority Report or something, is really how we want to be able to begin to think about this, and not as some staid object that just sits there. But the beauty of it is that if we do make those changes, I know all the way back up to business capabilities and beyond exactly how that business capability is being improved, and to what degree is my investment in this effort going to translate into betterment for the organization at the strategic level. Okay.
And this question just came in, and I was just about to call this out too. One of my favorite things in the roadmaps and Clarity is that scenario modeling, right? So you might have multiple scenarios. You've got the plan of record, but you also can take this and do the like what if scenario modeling and say, well, okay, well, what if this tariff does hit? What if this one doesn't? What if I, my customer base changes based on AI adoption, right? Like there's, who are my customers? Are they even people anymore? Do I need to figure out a new way to interact with a group of AI agents and things like that? There's a lot of change in the market and a lot of uncertainty right now. So being able to model some of the different scenarios that might occur and understand, based on different events, you can actually reflect changes and model those what ifs and say, okay, well, if this thing happens, then this is kind of what we expect to be the pivot that we're going to make. And that kind of takes us into the next slide, is how do you know that if you're making this decision at the business level, how do you know that your teams are actually aligned to those changes, right? And this is where, again, the coupling between Rally and Clarity come in, because our capacity planning, which, at a minimum, you can be doing this at a quarterly basis, right? If you're going to make these changes, which is really fast for a lot of organizations. Right? If you're going to try and make a change within a single quarter, it's a big deal. But being able to see the alignment metrics around, this is what the business is now asking for, right? That's the roadmap. This is kind of the ask. This is what we're intending to do based on the current situation, based on our strategy, based on those outcomes. But you can actually see in Rally then, what is this achievable? Can we do this? Do we need more people? Do we have enough staff? Do we have enough resources? Do we need to reprioritize the other things we're working on? Because being able to kind of very quickly drill in and see, based on all the work that we're planning for this upcoming quarter, how much of it aligns to those top level strategies, or which investment category are we investing in, and all these different things, to be able to make sure that you're actually aligned from the execution side of things to what that business strategy really is. And this is kind of where the rubber meets the road here, I think, and making sure that you're aligned on those pivots.
Absolutely. And as I talked about earlier, that execution is the problem, but the problem is not execution. Execution, we can execute very, very well these days. We have lots of tools. We have lots of capability within Rally to handle that execution, especially with the advent of, as I mentioned, DevOps and AI. But when we have the execution side of the organization being able to move so quickly, we may have to get our business to a side of the organization to be able to catch up, because no longer do they have to live with a decision that has mediocre results just simply because of the calendar. If the execution is able to accelerate and move faster as the world demands, then so should the business and their decisions. And so making sure it's all tethered and tied together is important, so that as we accelerate in business, as we accelerate in execution, we could also accelerate in business. And that's going to be a very new muscle for a lot of people in business, is being able to accelerate that way. But this opens up the promise of being able to just simply responding faster and more quickly to events and opportunities.
Exactly. And that's what this is all about, right?
That's absolutely all about. So I guess in closing here, the final takeaway is, how does total agility kind of fit in? We've talked about what happens 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We talked about what happens A, B, C, D, F on the capability-based planning side. We talked about how Rally and Clarity are fully integrated to be able to support that effort. Well, total agility is the coming together of all of that from ICON, plus the ability to actually build out your business architecture quickly and rapidly. As I talked earlier, we have many more new parts, and the ecosystem slide shows at least about 10 or 11 different pieces and parts. How do we get to a point where that's usable for the business, and we're not now just simply turning the project of building the business architecture into a project in and of itself? So we think we have a solution for that. We have a way of applying databases of different business capability maps, different strategy maps, and AI, SIC codes, and lots of financial information to be able to, in a matter of days, maybe weeks, to be able to build out that full business architecture capability within any organization, whether they have it or not, with the partnering of Clarity and Rally. And Total Agility instantiates and installs all of the value streams and the business capabilities and the strategies and all of that stuff that you need to be able to have that traceability that takes you from some element or some feature that's being delivered, tying it back to what capability is being improved by that feature. So the total synthesis of this new great way of thinking about the problem and being able to accelerate the business because the world's rate of change is accelerating. That's the problem that Total Agility is here to solve.
Yeah, and hopefully we've kind of shown you some ideas around how Clarity, Rally together can help do this. Again, the Total Agility offering from ICON is a fantastic way to actually implement this in your organization if that's something that you're looking to do. And in fact, I think on the next slide, we've got your contact info, James, if people did want to reach out.
Yeah, call me. Yeah.
Stella wanted her phone number on here, so definitely call her.
Call Stella, please. Call Stella, yeah.
You guys are an amazing partner, and I think this concept is great. One of the questions that came in is, are we saying that execution is not the problem, nor is strategy? The problem is really the misalignment between the two. And I think that's kind of an interesting takeaway from all of this.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I would say that that definitely moves us in the right direction. The only thing I would add to that to really get us across the bridge there is, for most of your strategists, they're not working from a business capability standpoint either. So capability awareness is absent on the execution side. Capability awareness is absent on the strategy side. And so the idea is to introduce something that closes that gap, and that is business capabilities.
Yeah, and this is not an easy thing to go alone and try to tackle. This is something that it's somewhat of an emerging field. It's been around for a while, but I think it's really kind of finding more of its mark in large organizations now that are trying to do this and trying to make these pivots. This is kind of what we talked about in the last webinar. You need dedicated people. You need a lot of experience to really understand what those business capabilities are for your organization and how to apply them in the ways to have these outcomes that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, maybe we need to have a webinar that takes a particular example and drills into it and shows the power of the erection of the business architecture within an organization.
I think that's a great idea. If all of you listening or what you want to see more and have questions, I think the poll just went live, Mike. If I'm not missing that little icon. So please do provide your feedback on the content, on what you'd like to see next. And if you're interested in learning more about total agility and how Rally, Clarity, and Icon Agility services can come together to deliver these capabilities for your organization, this is the contact info for the right people to do so. Anything else we need to close out on? I think this is probably a good time to stop unless there's any other questions that do come in.
Yeah, do we have any other questions? That'd be great to hear.
There's a question about how much visibility does the execution side have into the strategy side? So from a Rally user into the Clarity side. The answer there is obviously it depends. There's a lot of factors in terms of how your implementation is set up to determine who has access to what's in Clarity. There's a lot of ways out of the box that we can have that data flow about that connection all the way up. So there's definitely ways for us to bring that together and actually see that. It does require a little bit more transparency. And that kind of comes back to, actually, James, I did want to touch on this. You mentioned organizational safety earlier, and I think this is part of there's a whole other topic and webinar we can run on some of that. But having trust within your organization, both from the bottom down or the bottom up and the top down, I think that's what part of this alignment actually also provides here, right? Is having visibility and the traceability.
And the ability to have your organization lean into what that trust should be. We have a lot of situations where you're just not allowed to do certain things simply because no one has really thought about it or hasn't brought that issue forward. But the potential of this offering is that to that question asker, is that if I have some artifact on the execution side, I should be able to understand, travel through and trace it back to some type of business capability, so I can understand what the investment thinking is and the intention is and what I'm fulfilling by doing this job. I mean, the idea is that it really gets to the Dan Pink point about fulfilling and making sure people understand purpose, right? So we can do that. But an impediment to doing that might be your organization's culture or your organization's sense of security and how they want to manage that. And we'll have to leave that fight for a different day. But in the words of the $6 million man, we have the technology, right? So we can do the things.
But no. Well, I don't see any questions coming in, and just a reminder, the poll is there, so please do respond. And James, I can't thank you enough. This was so much fun, so insightful, and I really hope all of you listening got as much out of this as I did, because I think this is a fascinating conversation and a fascinating world that a lot of our customers are living in and struggling with, and I'm happy to see that we can actually help solve a lot of those challenges. So thank you so much.
And thank you for you guys just hosting this, and thanks Stella for tapping my shoulder for this, and also thank Mike for all the things that you do that are unseen but super, super powerful.
Keeps all this moving.
Indeed.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and I think we'll close that out here. So have a great day.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.